So a very warm welcome for the second session, where we are looking at the vision of both Bodhisattva Ashok and Babasaheb Ambedkar in terms of Sadhamma. And we have had our first session day before yesterday. And today we will be looking at how Babasaheb Ambedkar sort of perceived things. So I'm going to begin with the presentation. So let me share my presentation. Yes. So are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Just make it a full screen.
If I make it a full screen, then I cannot manage. Okay. Okay, is this okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So, I have titled this second session as, uh, I don't know how people are joining, and wait 1 minute. Let's not go with the this thing full screen, because then it creates problem. So I titled this second session as Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Reawakening the Vision of Ashoka. And just to recapitulate a little bit following from our first session, that as we have seen that Ashoka was the flag bearer of the revolution of Buddhism. That time this word Buddhism didn't exist. It's a new word, and Buddha and Ashoka used the word Buddha Sasana. And I think Sasana is the proper word for describing the teachings of the Buddha. And Ashoka, in fact, used that word Buddha Sasana. So we have seen that Ashoka's Dhamma was universal in nature, like we have seen in the first session. He used the word Dhamma in Prakrit, Eusebia in Greek, and schist in Aramaic. So this is just to show that his approach to Dhamma was very, I would say, depending on the audience, he would craft his message, and therefore we see many meanings of the word term Dhamma in not only Ashoka's scheme of things, but also in the Buddha's, and as we will be seeing also in the scheme of um Babasaheb Ambedkar. So, just to give you a little bit of a snapshot, he started issuing inscriptions after 10 years of his coming to power. And Kalinga was before 2 years of his becoming a Buddhist by the end of his 40 years career. So, his career spanned for 40 years. And if we study the inscriptions, we come to know that according to Ashoka, the Dhamma was established in Indian subcontinent. That's what he says. And subsequently, we know that the Mauryan Empire was attacked. Prior to the rise of Ashoka, it was called the Magadha Empire. Chandragupta's empire was called Magadha Empire. But when Ashoka came to power, it was called Ashokan Empire or Mauryan Empire. And we know that subsequently Mauryan Empire was attacked. Mauryan Brahmi, let's not use the word Brahmi, but as it is found in the books, we are using it. But as we can see that this Ashokan Lipi could not be read at the time when Fashian visited India and Xuanzang visited India. But that doesn't mean that they didn't know that these were the pillars of Ashoka, because in the Chinese translation of Ashoka Vadan, the information, the biography of Ashoka was available. So naturally, the Chinese knew about Ashoka, and but they couldn't. Nobody in India at that time, when Fashian and Xuanzang visited, could read the Dhamma and by the end of 14th century, it was completely forgotten, and that even the pillars have anything to do with Ashoka. Now, after a long span of time, in 1837, James Prinsep deciphered the Dhamma, and even then, it was not sure that the author of those rock edicts and the pillar edicts was Ashoka. People had some inkling of it. They used to call him Devanama Priyadarshi, but they had no inkling that it was Ashoka. But in 1923, in South India, in Musky, this what is called one inscription was found where Ashoka's name was inscribed. So that was confirmed that the writer of these inscriptions was nobody but Ashoka. And we know that subsequently modern India adopted the Ashokan philosophy, Ashokan symbols, and so on. But very interestingly, if we look at the Ashoka's rise in India, before the Ashoka, the history of Indian subcontinent, I would say, was nothing astonishing. As the scholars are now saying that Ashoka's rise was the watershed moment in the history of the world. Before the rise of Ashoka, there was of course Buddha, but we are talking in terms of the uh, political framework. And as Charles Allen we have seen, he declares Ashoka to be India's founding father. And the Ashokan writings were the watershed in the history of India. And subsequently, what we find that all the major writings of the Brahminical sort of texts we had Ashoka conspicuous of his absence. Like if you look at Mahabharata, Ramayana, even Manusmriti, they had invisible Ashoka with whom they were arguing. And the scholars, there are some very scholarly works which have come up, which points out to that. Now, we will be looking at that briefly. And his idea of India, then Jambudvipa, was based on Dhamma. We found that the cornerstone or the keynote of his political system was Dhamma. And we have seen that Ashoka applied Dhamma in various ways for the welfare of all. His Dhamma is inclusive and universal. Because these facts are important because they help us to determine what happened in the course of the Indian history subsequently after the fall of the Mauryan Empire. Because Ashoka, it is said they give the metaphor like this, that Ashoka, till the time of Ashoka was like a dam where a lot of ideas accumulated, and after Ashoka, they burst into the scene of the Indian subcontinent. So, as we have seen that Ashoka applied Dhamma in various ways for the welfare of all. His Dhamma is inclusive and universal. Ashoka embodied the ideal ruler. He was the sort of the paragon of what an ideal ruler can be. And that is very important because subsequently in the Indian history, his role was sort of, identified, and everybody talked about Ashoka as a kind of the ideal ruler. And when the Brahminical system started talking about the ideal ruler, they were actually criticizing Ashoka. Ashoka's idea of India was attacked in two ways. It was physically attacked and it was textually attacked. And we will be looking at how it was done. So there can be many framework of understanding the history, but I'm going to choose Babasaheb's framework. And it's very interesting to see how Babasaheb Ambedkar looked at the Indian history. So to bring to you something very interesting here, that now we know for sure that Babasaheb Ambedkar himself said that he was a Buddhist at the age of 16. That's what he told to Rahula Valapola, the great Sri Lankan monk. And in 1960, in the World Buddhism magazine, Rahula Valapola mentions that Babasaheb Ambedkar himself told him that he was a Buddhist very early on at the age of 16. And we know that, the atmosphere around him had a lot of what we can say elements of Buddhism. So that's what was there. And revival of Buddhism, as we know that this he was studying Buddhism for very early on, and then we know that how the Constitution of India relates to Dhamma in terms of three values. And he inaugurated the revival of Buddhism in India. He built institutions for the revival of Buddhism in India. We know that he started Buddhist Society of India, both the Jan Panchayat, and he was very much part of the international development at that time in terms of the World Fellowship of Buddhists. Now, one of the interesting thing about Babasaheb Ambedkar is this, that he has done incisive research work on Indian history. And we can begin to appreciate that now, the kind of meticulous efforts he put in terms of digging out India's past. And there are many texts that we can refer to, but particularly this text that I have put up here, Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India, very, very pithy text. And, the kind of knowledge that Babasaheb Ambedkar has produced there, such kind of a knowledge you find today in terms of understanding the Indian history in the scholarship of a lot of scholars. And they don't disagree with what Babasaheb Ambedkar has said in this book. Rather, most of them are now beginning to appreciate what he did in revolution and counter-revolution in ancient India. It's a very interesting book that Babasaheb Ambedkar himself, wanted his people to study. Now, this small booklet, Decline and Fall of Buddhism, this is a major question as to what happened to Buddhism in India. And nobody for sure, knows what has gone wrong. But this Decline and Fall of Buddhism, a very small booklet written by Babasaheb Ambedkar, I think it's a pithy statement on what might have happened. And we will be looking at it briefly in the course of our presentation. And then Rise and Fall of Hindu Women, another interesting text where Babasaheb Ambedkar defends the Buddha stand of liberating the women and the Shudras. Very interesting. And there Babasaheb Ambedkar goes and develops a methodology to study the Pali text and the Buddha Vachan. Who were the Shudras, of course, is a seminal text, and who were the untouchables. Very fascinating two books. Of course, there is the Buddha and his Dhamma, and in the last session we are going to look at the Buddha and his Dhamma and the Ashokan inscriptions. But that's for the last lecture. So I just wanted to put it up to you all that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was very, very well read in the Buddhist studies. He had researched a lot because we know that his mind was very, research oriented. He has gone into the depth of, whatever resources available to him. So I just wanted to, put that in the beginning to, establish the stage for our exploration. Now, we need an interpretive machinery because in order to know something, we need certain tools to understand what has happened. And as when the complex subject like history is concerned, we need some kind of a framework to really make sense of it. And we can see that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had this interpretative machinery that even we can use today to dig out the Indian past, the past of India, Indian subcontinent. And Babasaheb Ambedkar very beautifully termed it as exhuming ancient India. His interest in the ancient India was very fascinating. And this word exhuming means it's in the archaeological sense. And I termed it as Babasaheb's fascination for the archaeology of Buddhism. He was so much fascinated to go to dig deep into the texts, to even look at the archaeological reports. And if you visit his library, you will find many archaeological reports. You will find a lot of books on Buddhism, Buddhist arts, and Buddhist symbols, and so on and so forth. So his interest was very much into the archaeology of Buddhism. And he said this very remarkable statement: with the help of Buddhist literature, ancient Indian history can be dug out of the debris which the Brahmin writers have heaped upon in the feet of madness. So the history that has been thrown to us in terms of a single lopsided view coming from the Brahminical point of view, it didn't appeal to Babasaheb Ambedkar. It won't appeal to anybody if we look at what has happened in the history of our country. So I think this particular statement that is there, that with the help of Buddhist literature, ancient Indian history can be dug out of the debris which the Brahmin writers have heaped upon in the feet of madness. And he says something very interesting here. He says that before Muslim invasion, the Indian history is the mortal conflict between Buddhism and Brahmanism. And keep that point in your mind, because it helps us to understand what happened to India, what happened to Buddhism in the Indian subcontinent. So this particular point, that before Muslim invasion, the Indian history is the mortal conflict between Buddhism and Brahmanism. And then one of the most interesting thing that we can all appreciate is to determine the chronology of the Buddhist and Brahminical texts. And Babasaheb Ambedkar spends a lot of his energy, lot of his erudite scholarship in dating the various Brahminical texts. And he that time proved that this text like Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Manusmriti, they all, post Ashoka. And now the scholars are saying that there was a period in the Indian history, a concentrated period of few years, where these texts were written. So it's very interesting point that Babasaheb Ambedkar made that time, that they are all post Ashoka texts, and they were written in response to the great revolution that Ashoka has inaugurated in the Indian subcontinent. We cannot imagine what Ashoka has done and what Buddha has done. When Babasaheb Ambedkar says that, the implication of the Buddha's revolution is far greater than the French Revolution. You can begin to see that, the kind of revolution that might have taken place in this part of the world then. So to establish the chronology of the Buddhist and Brahminical text is very important. Even today, we have to go. The philologists have to look into the text. They have to find out the intertextual references, and the scholarship, the methods have advanced so much that now people are beginning to see as to how and when the different texts of both Buddhist and Brahminical leanings have come up. According to Babasaheb Ambedkar, the major periods in the Indian history of Indian subcontinent, Nagas and the Aryas. He talks about that, and now I think it's very well established in the domain of scholarship that Indus Valley civilization had nothing to do with the Aryan, and they migrated, and the Indus Valley civilization was a very different sort of a civilization, which became the basis of it formed the substratum of whatever happened in the subcontinent. And there are very interesting books which have come up recently. One particular book by a very renowned South Indian bureaucrat, The Journey of Civilization, where he talks about how the Indus Valley civilization migrated to the South India, and it can be likened with the Nagas and the Damils and Tamils and so on and so forth, because people can have identified the various words that were used in that part of the world and in the Tamil or southern languages. So there's very interesting thing going on. But for our understanding, we will keep it like this, that the conflict between the Nagas and the Aryans. And according to Babasaheb Ambedkar, the Dhanananda was the first he was the first founder of a big political system in India, followed by the other Nagas. He says that even Chandragupta Maurya was a Naga, and if Chandragupta Maurya was a Naga, Ashoka definitely was a Naga. And we know from the research that has taken place that in the greater Magadha, it was not in the garb of the Vedic Hinduism. There might be some Brahmin villages or some kind of establishment, but it was not the mainstay in that part of the world. The Magadha, greater Magadha, it was totally dominated by the Shramnik tradition. And then Babasaheb Ambedkar says that when we study the history of India, we have to look at it like the Buddhist India, Muslim India, and British India. And I think this particular classification is very important because they offer us the tool to understand what has happened in the history of India. And as I said, it is an interpretive machinery that we have to employ in order to dig the past, in order to understand, make sense of whatever the evidences that are available in the archaeological sources, in the textual sources. So I think that's a very fine point that Babasaheb Ambedkar has defined the major periods in the Indian history like this. And it is not that a handful of people cannot colonize the majority of the people. It has happened in the history. Babasaheb Ambedkar says that look at British. When they came to India, they were handful, but they ruled the Indian subcontinent and whatnot. So it is not a big thing that a handful of Brahmins have sabotage and take hold of the power in this country. So he gives these three examples. Handfuls of can colonize, like the Aryans did it, the Muslim invaders, and the British. The Buddhist India was invaded by the Brahmin, and the people of the subcontinent were colonized. So in fact, Babasaheb Ambedkar uses a very interesting phrase, the Brahminical invasion of the Buddhist India. And I think this terminology is very, very interesting. Let people come and argue with us. I think now we got substantial sort of the evidences to prove what Babasaheb Ambedkar has established in the revolution and counter-revolution and other works that he has written. Now, what happened after Ashoka? Ashoka's grandson Brihadatta was murdered, and Ashokan empire was overthrown, and Pushyamitra Shunga came into power. And the rise of Pushyamitra, as we can see from various textual evidences, that he attacked Buddhism very violently. In fact, he destroyed the Kukutagama monastery that was so dear to Ashoka near Patliputra, and even today Chinese, they don't take the name of Pushyamitra. He's so I would use the word hated among the Buddhists. Now, the counter-revolution that ensued challenged Ashokan ideals through crafting new literature. So this literature, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and various Smritis, including Manusmriti, they are written or drafted after the Ashokan Empire was attacked. And we can now establish it with, a lot of scholars are accepting this. As we have seen, Ashokan ideal was based on Dhamma, which means equality, rule of law, fraternity, welfare of all, harmony. And we have seen that Dhamma as the first term in Ashoka. So we have seen various words that Ashoka used, like Dhamma Niyamena, like Dhamma Ruddhi, Dhamma Yatra, and so on and so forth. So for him, the Dhamma came first. But when we see, when the counter revolution take place, the Dhamma came second. Like, Varnashrama Dharma. So it's the Dharma of Varnashrama. So Varnashrama Dharma is a fact. We are talking about the Dharma of it. Raja, the king, is the fact. We are talking about his Dharma. Raja Dharma, Kula Dharma, Jati Dharma. But in the scheme of Ashoka, such was not the case. He was talking about the Dharma or Dhamma as the universal thing. And based on that rule, everything will follow. The social structure will follow, the rule, the governance will follow, and so on and so forth. And we've seen how broad and wide was the definition of Dhamma in the scheme of Ashoka. New mythical Dhamma Rajas like Yudhishthir and Rama, were written and counter the real Dhamma Raja, Ashoka. As I said, that all the stupas built by Ashoka, they were called the Dhamma Rajika stupa. And as I said in the first session, that Gita is the parody on Ashoka, and there is a lot of things which we can bring to, and I'm going to put all the references in the group when we create it. Now, this new Brahminical genre of literature came into existence, and the Buddhists continue to respond till the fall of Buddhism. That's very interesting. Even when there was an attack on Buddhism, both physically and textually, the Buddhists didn't stop from creating the knowledge, producing the knowledge. And we know that Nalanda, Vallabhi, and these big institutes were already there. So it is not that it has happened in one go, that the Buddhism was not destroyed, in one sort of blow. The process continued to take place. And what Babasaheb Ambedkar terms it as the decline of Buddhism. When the Brahmins started attacking the Buddhism, it didn't vanish just like that. It was there for a long time, and as we know that, as a matter of fact, that the Buddhism declined. Can say somebody's mic is on. So new mythical Dhamma Rajas, Yudhishthira and Rama, to counter the real Dhamma Raja Ashoka. A new Brahminical genre of literature came into existence. The Buddhists continued to respond till the fall of Buddhism. Now, this is a very classic sort of a classification that has been handed over to us by the scholars who have studied the Dharma texts. So you can see that in the first cluster, there is a early Mauryan. And you can see here, 1 minute, 1 minute, somebody's mic is on.
It's Xiaomi 23129RN51.
Yeah. Can
Please
somebody
mute
block
it.
him?
I think you are the host. You have admin access.
Just give me 1 minute. So this is a very interesting documentation or catalog of the the chronology of the various texts which were written. And as we have seen in the first session, that the Ashokan edicts were sort of the first written records of anything to do with the Dharma or Dhamma. And according to there was this what is called the Apastamba Dharma Sutra and Buddhist Nikayas. Buddhist Nikayas were getting formed that time. And the second cluster, as you can see from here, latter Maurya, is Buddhist Abhidharma, Buddhist Vinaya, Gautama Dharma Sutra, Bodhayana Dharma Sutra. And if you look at the third cluster, which is, I think, the most important for us, is the Mahabharata, Ramayana, Manusmriti, Manava Dharma Shastra, the laws of Manu. They were all written after the fall of Mauryan Empire, and that's we can see it very clearly here. And cluster 4, post-Kanvar, early Kushanas, there is a very interesting text, Vasishta Dharma Sutra and Ashwaghosh Buddha Charitra. So this Ashwaghosh Buddha Charitra is very, very important to understand, because Babasaheb Ambedkar used Ashwaghosh Buddha Charitra, and we know that Ashwaghosh was also author of a very foundational text called Vajra Suchi, which became a sort of a scathing text to attack the Brahmanism in the modern times. It is also said that Ashwaghosh was the founder of Mahayana Buddhism. And Buddha Charitra is a very interesting sort of a thing, because it was written after the Ramayana and Mahabharata in order to defend the Buddhist Dharma, and in order to claim the legitimacy of what is called the Buddhist. One minute. So this is very interesting, Ashwaghosh's Buddha Charitra, because Buddha Charitra also forms a very important part of the Buddha and his Dhamma. So that's why, this study of Ashwaghosh's Buddha Charitra is very important. So you can see from this particular chronology, we can see that Ashoka's edict, the first written records, before that there was a oral tradition, and Buddhist Nikaya. Some people, scholars now argue that Buddhist texts were written long before Ashoka, but we have no evidence of that. We have only evidence of Ashokan edicts. So I put it up there in order to show you that this is what the scholars are agreeing today on the chronology of the various Buddhist and Brahminical texts in India. So I just put this two comments by renowned scholars. It talks about intertextual interactions. Professor Oliver, of course, we met him before in the first session, where he talks about the very creation of a Brahminical genre of literature dedicated to Dharma was possibly due to the elevation of this word to the level of imperial ideology by Ashoka. So very interesting statement by a very profound scholar, Professor Oliver, who has studied a lot of Brahminical texts. And this is what he concludes in terms of the very creation of Brahminical genre of literature dedicated to Dharma was possibly due to the elevation of this word to the level of imperial ideology of Ashoka. And Professor Byadev, he has made a very interesting point. This is the point he makes. The epics, that is Mahabharata's riposte, means answer or response to Buddhism, was achieved by Bhakti swerve away from Brahminical orthodoxy. So this, as we know that in the Indian history, the Bhakti began, with Rama and Krishna as the center figure. And when Buddha Charitra was written, it was written in a sense of, a lot of faith in the Buddha. And so you see this whole evolution of various sort of practices in Indian subcontinent can be very much gleaned by the study of the text, as we can see from here. Now, I put up this interesting slide here because this decline and fall of Buddhism is a very interesting sort of area to look into. And this is where Babasaheb Ambedkar's genius lies. He talks about not disappearance of Buddhism. He talks about decline and fall of Buddhism. And he says that because of the invasion of Buddhist India by the Brahmins, the Buddhism started declining. It was weakening. And the Muslim invasion finally laid a fatal blow to the Buddhist institutions. And he says the Muslim invasion was responsible for the fall of Buddhism. Very interesting points. These two, the way he has created the categories to think through about the history, to me at least, they are very interesting. And you can begin to see that, you can begin to see how, we can look at the history of India in terms of the decline and fall of Buddhism. Now we know for sure that the Buddhism was not really dead in terms of, its presence among the people. We know there was Sahajyana, there was Mahima Dharma. We can read a lot of Buddhism in the Sant literature, like in Kabir, Raidas, Tukaram, even Eknath. So, we cannot really say that, Buddhism disappeared from India. In fact, Buddhism was there, as the new findings have come till 15th century in Maharashtra. And when the modern time came, and when Ashoka was discovered, when Buddhist archaeological sites were, excavated, the interest in the Dhamma was reawakened. And there are a lot of good books which are coming up, which are showing Dust on the Throne, for example, or the recent book by Gitanjali Surendran, Democracy Dharma. They're very interesting books in terms of showing us how the in the 17th, 18th century people were so much interested in the Buddhas, in the Buddha Dhamma, because of this reawakening of the interest in Dhamma. So I think this is a very interesting interpretive tool to understand what happened to the Buddhism in India. Now, for our interest, it's very important to trace the intellectual history of the word Dhamma. And prior to Ashoka, the word Dhamma was not raised to such a high level. Of course, the Buddha has used the word Dhamma many times, and in many ways there are many meanings of the word Dhamma. I have referred to that in the first session. But it was Ashoka who took it to on a very different level, the understanding, the interpretation of the word Dhamma. And we can take it for our convenience here, Dhamma as the universal practice, including all. As we have seen in the first session, that Ashoka included everybody, Sabba Nikayesu. No group of the people was excluded from his service to them. And if you look at the intellectual history of the term Dhamma, we have early Buddhism, Tripitaka, where there are in Sutta Pitak there is a lot of interpretation of the word Dhamma. Then of course there is Abhidhamma, which is altogether a different level of understanding the word Dhamma. And then we know that the Brahmins started picking up on this word Dhamma in the new literature that came up after the fall of Mauryan Empire. So you see, this is not just one way process. We can say it was like a dialectical sort of exchange between Buddhism and Brahmanism. And lot of Buddhist Brahminical texts have Buddhism. It's written in response to Buddhism. Even Shankara's philosophy is written in response to Buddhism, isn't it? So we will not go into that because that's not our area. We are dealing with a different matter. So suffice here is to keep in mind that Dharma following the counter-revolution as understood by the latter Buddhists like Ashwaghosh as reflected in his two literary works, Buddha Charitra and Vajrasuchi. Buddha Charitra is very important book. It can be very controversial because it's written after Ramayana and Mahabharata. It borrows a lot of elements from that, but it also tries to establish the Buddha's position as the again the great ideal of Dhamma Raja, and then of course Vajrasuchi, which we have talked briefly. So revolution and counter-revolution around the word Dhamma. So whenever you hear the word Dhamma in the Indian context, either in Jain or Buddhist or Brahminical literature, you have to be very mindful as to what it is referring to, what is the interpretation of it, and how we can understand it. So I will leave it to that. Then we know that when Ashoka was rediscovered, when his interpretation of Dhamma was rediscovered, the meaning of the word took a completely different turn. And when it came to the modern Indian history, like people are calling like it's Dhamma for democracy and so on. So the whole constellation of meaning around the word Dhamma has got a very different sort of an interpretation when it comes to the democracy, economics, science, and so on and so forth. So we begin to see that how this following the intellectual history of the word Dhamma can be of so much consequence. As to, I think a lot of scholarship has been drawn now to that understanding how the term Dhamma had different meanings. And, so from that perspective, I find Babasaheb's Buddha and his Dhamma very interesting because his was also attempt to make sense of the term Dhamma in the sort of modern sense, in terms of the contemporary happenings, in terms of the contemporary developments. So I find it very interesting if we trace the intellectual history of the term Dhamma. Now, as I said that in this presentation, I was going to put Babasaheb Ambedkar in the foreground and Ashoka in the background. So, of course, we know that the Buddha's revolution was a Dhamma revolution. Ashoka magnified it manifold. Then there were setbacks, revolution and counter-revolution, ebb and flow, and of course, Babasaheb Ambedkar launched the Dhamma revolution towards the enlightened India. So we know that his roots in the civil rights movement, particularly in the non-Brahman movement, Phule Shahu movement. We know that he launched what can be called, he was a part and parcel of the democratic revolution. We have seen it that he has been doing it from 1919 onwards, talking about the democracy in India. And in 1941, he's talking, in fact, about the Buddhism and democracy. Then we know that Bahujan revolution, the disenfranchised were enfranchised. And finally, we had the idea of India based on justice for all, liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity, and integrity of the nation. The preamble summarizes everything. And our constitution set out for peaceful and harmonious path to progress. Now, when we look at this, we can, of course, parallel a lot of these values in the Ashokan writings. Now, we can think about Babasaheb in terms of the two revolutions, and not that these two revolutions were separate. These two revolutions were in sync. So, let's term one revolution as a democratic revolution and another as Dhamma revolution. So they were not separate. If we look at the thought process of Babasaheb Ambedkar, we can see that, they are happening at the same time. So let me put up here a very interesting quotation by Lalmani Joshi. Some of you might not be knowing this gentleman. He was a very learned scholar who died very young, and he wrote a very fascinating book, Discerning the Buddha, where he exposes the hypocrisy of the India's nationalist leaders towards the Buddhas, Vivekananda, Gandhi, and so on and so forth. And he was ardent fan of Babasaheb Ambedkar. So the first revolution that we are talking about, democratic revolution, constitutional revolution 1950, this is what Lalmani Joshi says. The constitution destroyed the culture of Vedic Aryans. What Buddha, Mahavir, Ashok, Nalanda University, Sarhapada, Kabir, Guru Nanak, Raidas, and Akbar could not do, the Constitution of India led by Babasaheb Ambedkar did it. So very interesting comment by very renowned scholar Lalmani Joshi. And he uses a very beautiful designation for Babasaheb Ambedkar. He calls him Lokanayak. I have never come across this epithet for Babasaheb Ambedkar. Lokanayak, the leader of the people. And that's what he has to say. And it's true that when the constitution became the supreme law of the land, everything under it became subordinate to it. But this is not so, because even if we bring the political changes, we need to have the deep cultural changes. And that is what the Dhamma revolution is all about. And therefore, Babasaheb Ambedkar launched, I would say, formally, Dhamma revolution 1956. And we know that he was a Buddhist from long time, when he was 16. So Ashokan India can only be realized by the peaceful Dhamma revolution that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar inaugurated on Ashok Vijayadashmi in 1956. And in the third session, I'm going to go into, what this Dhamma revolution consists of, how we can bring the thoughts of Ashok and Babasaheb Ambedkar together, how we can make those values and the principles play in today's world. In other words, what we can learn from Ashoka and Babasaheb Ambedkar to bring out to create the Buddha Sasana in the, on this earth. And that's going to be the topic of the third session. But I just wanted to bring to you these two revolution in focus, the democratic revolution and the Dhamma revolution. Now, going back to the 22 vows of Dhamma revolution, because we have seen that the Indian history, intellectual history, is all about Dhamma, defining Dhamma, Dhamma, Adhamma. And we know that finally there is Sadhamma. So, Adhamma, if we look at the 22 vows, they are the 22 vows of the Dhamma revolution. Very interesting. If we study them, we found that this vow number 1 to 8, they are meant to counter the Brahminical counter revolution. And in the terms of, because they don't do good to the people, they talk about inequality, they talk about slavery and so on and so forth, we can qualify them as Adhamma. And of course, we see this tripartite arrangement of classification in Babasaheb Buddha and his Dhamma, which I'm going to touch briefly in the third sort of a session, Adhamma. Dhamma, reawakening of the Dhamma, vow number 9 to 19, very beautifully written by Babasaheb Ambedkar, which talks about Dhamma. And only once this word Sadhamma appears in the 22 vows, where, this vow number 20 is about, I firmly believe that the Dhamma of the Buddha is the only Sadhamma. So, like Ashoka respected all the Dhammas, he said, you clarify your stand on your Dhamma and you talk with each other so that a lot of terms will be clarified, a very deliberate approach to creation of knowledge and the truth. But Ashoka also declares the Buddha's Dhamma as the Sadhamma, and very interesting category of Sadhamma. And in the 22 vows, Babasaheb Ambedkar, in vow number 20, he says that the Dhamma of the Buddha is the only Sadhamma, and vow number 21, 22, they are about practicing new path. So to come to the end, what I tried to do is, this is a tentative sort of a chart I have created to, urge us or make us think more in terms of what is happening, mapping Ashoka and Buddhism today. Of course, this has to be elaborated. I'm just working on it, but this has to be elaborated. So on one hand, there is Babasaheb Ambedkar's Bahujan movement. We know Periyar, Phule, and Ayutithas, and all these great dignitaries like Bodhananda. Uh, you know, it's all great people. So they had a particular vision, as we know now, and so their attitudes, approach towards Buddhism was like this: that revival of Buddhism is essential for the liberation of Shudras and women. So here by Shudras, I mean both the OBCs and the scheduled castes. Vivekananda approach was fond of Buddha, but not of his doctrine. That was his approach. He was invited to give talks on Buddhism, but later he turned vitriolic towards Buddhism. Savarkar and Hindutva propagandist, Buddhism, according to them, weakened the Aryan power, and Buddhism is just a branch of Hinduism. That has been the stand they are taking up. And according to them, Buddhism has weakened the country. Very, very stupid argument. And Babasaheb Ambedkar invited Savarkar many times for the debates, which he declined to come in the public and discuss with him. And very, very fuzzy sort of their understanding of Buddhism. And even today we don't get a proper definition of what constitutes Hindutva, but only negatively, that Buddhism is not good, Buddhism is against Hindutva, like that. So that you find in the writings of Savarkar. Towards Ashoka, for the leaders of Bahujan movement, and I have taken Babasaheb Ambedkar as the ideal symbol of it. Is Ashokan India is the ideal to aspire, but the Buddha Dhamma is the core. So they just didn't stop with Ashoka. They went back to the Buddha. They went back to the Shakyasiya in order to make sense of the Buddhist revolution. Nehru was fond of Ashoka, but was not inclined towards revival of Buddhism. We know that Ashoka had liking for Nehru has a liking for Ashoka, but we know that he had no intention to revive Buddhism in this country. According to Savarkar and Hindutva ilk, Ashoka destroyed India because of his policy of peace. But Savarkar, I don't know, his history book starts with Buddha. And there is no history of India in terms of recorded history before the advent of Buddhism and Ashoka. We know that. Even the archaeological findings will testify that. Towards the revival of Buddhism is necessary for the democracy. That's what was the stand of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and the other leaders of the Bahujan movement. For example, Vivekananda, Nehru, and all these people have nothing, towards revival of Buddhism. In fact, Vivekananda was so antagonistic towards revival of Buddhism. Savarkar put on record that this conversion of Babasaheb Ambedkar is wrong. He should not do conversion. His followers will return back to Hinduism. In fact, it didn't happen. I read somewhere that his grandson or somebody has become Buddhist, somebody has become embraced Buddhism or something like that. So it has happened in the negative way, other way. Now, status today, which is very important for us, is we know that the revival movement is growing by leaps and bounds, but so much remains to be done. So much remains to be done. But we can see the positive signs of the revival of Buddhism today. We hardly hear Vivekananda and Nehru in this domain, so let them have some rest, like this blank quadrant here. And the Savarkar and Hindutva propagandists, they are going out to co-opt Buddhism to further economic and their political goals. And we can see time and again as to how Buddhism is used in order to further their economic and political goal, of course, as the branch of Hinduism. And no scholar will agree that how can the branch be bigger than the tree, the trunk. Buddhism is a much bigger reality. If we see much a bigger reality than Brahmanism, we can, even if our culturally grasp at the world, we can see that. So today I wanted to end here to throw some ideas so that we can discuss now. But before I conclude, I want to dedicate this particular session to Manyavar Kanshiram, who left us in 2006 on this very day, 9th October. And he's one of the pithy sentence, or he's one of these vows was, India of my dream is Ashokan India. So that's what Manyavar set out for when he launched this particular beautiful movement. So I will stop here and I will open the session for discussion, any comments, any question, and we'll try to make it more lively. So thank you very much. Let's open it up. Yes, Pritam.
Hi, Javim,
David.
and thank you again for the insightful session. It was really amazing. So my first question is that do you have any archaeological evidence or any inscription that Pushyamitra Sunga have destroyed Buddhist stupas and killed monks?
See, sometimes you are looking at something which has taken place 2000 years back, right? And there are textual references towards that. And as there is what is also called the archaeology of texts. Like using philology, using various techniques, you can go to a particular text. You can see how it was developed, when it might have been written, and from those texts you can glean as to what has happened, what might have happened at time. Some of the people, might claim that there is no physical evidence as such, but we certainly know that Buddhism was highly violently attacked. That's for sure. Buddhism has not, was not like destroyed peacefully. There are books like Hardship and Downfall of Buddhism in India, written by a very famous archaeologist, Giovanni Berardi. And when it comes to now, they are trying to claim, the Hindutva propagandists, that nothing like this happened. Pushyamitra didn't attack Brihadrat. If it is not so, why do you find such references in the remote places like China? I read somewhere that there is a bell which the Chinese people bang every time in their temple. They imagine that it's a skull of Pushyamitra. So how
Oh.
does this come? How there are certain ideas which we can glean by the practices, which we can glean from the textual sources. So we don't have like written somewhere in the inscription like Ashoka that this has happened, but definitely the violence has taken place. And all these texts that we talked about, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Manusmriti, they were written that period coincide with the fall of Mauryan Empire. And who came after the Mauryas? The Sungas, right?
Yeah, and I have read somewhere like many scholars are saying that Sunga was Buddhist himself and he repaired the Varuta stup.
Yes,
Is it true?
some of them might be there, because Buddhism was not just one dimensional. There were guilds, there were traders who were supporting Buddhism, isn't it? It was not like that, Buddhism was not powerful. You cannot cut the powerful force that time suddenly. And that's why the scholars are saying that there is a civic silence. Even after the fall of Mauryan Empire, they couldn't attack Ashoka directly. They have to find the indirect way, the conspiracy of silence around Ashoka, isn't it? So there might be definitely some Shungas who might be, supportive of Buddhism. Nobody denies that. But when it comes to Pushyamitra Shunga, you cannot absolve him like that.
All right. And my second question is that is there any evidence of Brahmins in the reign of Ashoka and before?
So it's a very complex topic. We touched upon it briefly last time. As we know now that the Magadhan, the Greater Magad, was not dominated by the Brahminical ideology for sure. There might be the pockets of villages or Mahashalas or the Jatilas, Brahmins, defined in two ways, in terms of having Mahashala or the big schools, or Jatilas, growing here. And
Mhm.
I think that time the Brahmins were a very different reality from what happened after Ashoka. And even subsequently, if you look at the history of the Chitpan Brahmins, they are different, altogether different, Brahminical reality. So, we cannot take the word Brahman in terms of the monotonous, as a kind of a single monotonous, identity.
So there are various meaning of Brahmin.
Yeah, there are various meanings of the Brahmins. And I think that question is immaterial, because if you look at the whole history of India, the material history of India, you will hardly find the presence of Brahmins in terms of the having the strong hold. Of course, they were the migratory classes migrating here and there, and as I talked about, in the first thing, that Nagas and Aryans. It is not that the Nagas and Aryans is a mythological thing, because this Indus Valley civilization has a direct bearing on what is called the so-called Tamil civilization. We know for sure now because of these DNA findings, early Indians, as to how,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, but everyone is mixed right now, so no one is
Yes,
true,
mixed,
like
mixed,
pure.
but you definitely know that the women belongs to the original substrata.
Yeah, it's true. And in Indica, Mahasnis have mentioned the two terms like Samanas and Brahmins, right?
Yes, Shramana, Brahmana, Aryans, and Nagas.
Oh yeah, okay, thank you.
No. It's very interesting, Pritam, that some of you have to really go into it. And there, as I said, we are just scratching the surface. There is so
Yeah, I have gone into the Sungas thing, but I didn't find any archaeological evidences regarding that, like any contemporary notes or any archaeological evidences like I mean, inscription or all.
right.
So yeah, thank you.
It is not that just I have to answer. There are learned people here. Atul Bhai is also here. And it is like discussion. So anybody can come in, and if they have anything to offer, please do so.
Yeah, I'd like to know for sure.
Okay. Other people, anyone? See, I have not come across the views of Gandhi on Ashoka. There is a question put up by Mahasen here. What are Gandhi's views on Ashoka and Buddha? Of course, you cannot criticize Buddha and Ashoka because it will be like self-criticism. So there are guarded sort of a criticism in the Gandhi's writing when it comes to Buddhism. And we know that Gandhi was a believer in the Varnashrama Dharma. That's on the records. So, it's very, strange that sometimes, some of the so-called, the Brahminical oriented scholars will bring these three figures together, Ashoka, Buddha, and Gandhi. But, they are not natural categories.
No, after Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had criticized Gandhiji
Hmm.
for believing on Chaturvarnya, he had changed his opinion about the Chaturvarnya because Babasaheb Ambedkar had said, as per Chaturvarnya system, you are the Vaishya. Then instead of taking balance in the hand, what you are doing in the politics?
So what was Gandhi's, how changed was Gandhi's opinion? What did he say about Ashoka and Buddha then?
No, I don't know.
Okay,
I have not come across with Buddha and Gandhi particularly, but
right,
he had changed later on. Babasaheb Ambedkar had said later on that Gandhi has started speaking in our language.
right. Thank you so much, Mahasinji.
Oh, okay.
Vinod Bade has a question. Jai Bhim, sir. Jai Bhim, sir. In Buddha's time, it's Jambudvipa. Babasaheb adopted the name of Bharat, that is India. What are the bases, sir? I have no idea, because he didn't, for us, it should be a relief that he didn't agree to the word Hindustan, isn't it? And I think Bharat seems to be like a very secular word. Jambudvipa, of course, was the name of the continent, and there were a few continents with Mount Meru as the center, according to the ancient geography. We don't know the geographical limits of Jambudvipa and so on and so forth. But Ashoka, one time in his inscription, he likened his kingdom empire with the word Jambudvipa. So I'm not sure. I have to look into that. Where there proofs that Varna system existed during Ashoka's time and what was his reaction to this system if it existed. As we have seen, Abhilash, in the previous first session, that Ashoka had written 4,600 words, and he is silent on the word Varna. And whenever he uses the words like high and low, he doesn't talk about Varna at all. He talks about the high and low people. And in his inscriptions, we have seen that he has sided with the low people in terms of their, opportunity for them to, practice the Dhamma and, cultivate their higher being. So Ashoka's time, there was no strict sort of the Varna system that we can say for sure. And Ashoka wouldn't have become the ruler of this great expanse had it existed. But after the fall of Mauryan kingdom, when the Manusmriti was written, lot of changes were made where the Brahmins could become the ruler and Brahmin could kill anybody. That is in Manusmriti, that is post Ashoka. Because according to that time, the terms of that time, Brahman couldn't be a ruler. They couldn't rule. They couldn't kill. But Brihadatta, this Pushyamitra had done that. He killed someone, the emperor, and then this Manusmriti goes on in defense of it complete. Manusmriti is a document which completely creates a powerful community of Brahmins, making them immune from any punishment. So it's all post Ashoka development. If you look at Manusmriti and all. Okay, anything? No. There are no relics of Ashoka found. In fact, only two portraits of Ashoka, they say. One a place where I think in Gulbarga, Kanganhalli, there is a portrait of Ashoka, and Raya Ashoka is written there. So that's one. And in the relief base of Sanchi, there is Ashoka holding two of his queens and about to faint after seeing the Bodhi Riksha, the Bodhi tree. So we don't know for sure whether, but that people, scholars say that might be the portrait of Ashoka. So we don't have any relics of Ashoka, and we even don't know where he died. People say that he died in South India. So, he was a great man who had this guts to say sorry. He was somebody who never tried to put himself as somebody who is a great person. And his edicts, his proclamations are very humble, unlike the proclamations in other parts of the world where the king boasts of their achievement. Even in India, like Samudragupta and all, they boast of their achievements, even when they are not factually true. But Ashoka, we find nowhere he's boasting about himself. He's a very down to earth person. He's a very compassionate man. He's somebody who would love to serve people instead of boasting about who he is, creating his own images. So that's the greatness of Ashoka. So it is not that you have to just ask me the questions. Many of you are well read. You can definitely, raise questions or, comment on what I said or add to the information that's already there on the table. All right. I think if there is nothing to discuss, we would conclude this session, and we'll meet up day after tomorrow for an interesting study, like how we can bring the writings of Ashoka and Babasaheb together and look at them comparatively and try to find out what we can do, in the future based on what they did and how they understood to as a means to transform the world. So that's for the session day after tomorrow, and we will conclude here. Thank you so much for all of you joining. I am, as a speaker, very delighted to see this response. A lot of people are joining all the time. We are reaching a lot of people, and that's very gratifying for me. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining, and see you day after tomorrow.
Thank you. Oh, I got a last question. Can I ask?
Yes, Prita.
So, what is the oldest evidence of Brahminical Sanskrit in India?
So you see, this first
Like
time
archaeological.
they say that the Panini's grammar, which was sort of written in Gandhara.
Some scholars say that Parines was himself a Buddhist.
Yeah. There are claims like that. And there are, a lot of beautiful grammar books are written by Buddhists, like Chandra Gomin, who has written a wonderful book on Sanskrit grammar.
So, according to UNESCO, the oldest Veda manuscript is like 1400 AD something.
Yes. These manuscripts are not available. Only interestingly, recently, they have found some Buddhist manuscripts in Pakistan because of the climatic conditions there, and they were put in the earthen pot and buried. So a lot of these Gandhari manuscripts have been discovered, and the scholars have been reading them, publishing beautiful books, and changing complete new understanding, giving us new understanding of the history of the texts.
Yeah, and we got Down Sutra from China, which
Yes,
is the oldest.
yes. That's for sure. Danhong Cave.
Yeah,
Good. Young people like you, Pritam, should go deep and bring us more knowledge.
sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. See you day after tomorrow. Jai Bhim, Jai Ashok, Namo Buddhaya.